For more than 3,000 years, he lay in silence, a man whose voice once echoed through the great temple of Karnak, calling upon the gods of ancient Egypt. He was a priest, a scribe, a keeper of rituals, and his final wish was simple: to be heard again in the afterlife. Millennia later, that wish has come true, not through magic, but through science. Using artificial intelligence, 3D scanning, and sound engineering, researchers have done the unthinkable. They have recreated the voice of a man who lived and died more than 3,000 years ago. This is not legend or myth. This is the true story of Nesyamun and how modern technology allowed the ancient world to speak again. Our story begins in Thebes, around 1100 BCE. Egypt was in decline, the age of the Great Pyramids was long past, and the empire's power was fading. But the temples, the beating heart of Egyptian religion, still thrived. Inside the vast temple of Karnak, priests performed rituals to honor the gods. They chanted sacred hymns, burned incense, and recited prayers that had been spoken for thousands of years. Among them was Nesyamun, a priest and scribe who served during the reign of Pharaoh Ramses XI, the last ruler of Egypt's new kingdom. His job was to perform daily offerings and recitations before the great statues of Amun-Ra. His voice was his instrument, trained, disciplined, and sacred. The Egyptians believed that the spoken word held divine power. To speak was to create. To name something was to give it life. And to speak the name of the dead was to keep their soul alive for eternity. So when Nesyamun was buried, his coffin bore an inscription that read, "Nesyamun, true of voice." It was both a blessing and a prophecy, one that would remain unfulfilled for more than 3,000 years. In 1824, during Britain's age of exploration, archaeologists working near Thebes uncovered a sealed sarcophagus. Inside was a remarkably well-preserved mummy, wrapped in linen, hands crossed over the chest, face peaceful in eternal rest. When examined, scholars found that Nesyamun's tongue and throat were still intact. Over time, his mummy became one of the most studied in the world. Displayed in the Leeds City Museum in England, generations of researchers analyzed his body, his coffin, and his inscriptions, learning more about his life and times, but no one could have imagined that, 2 centuries later, scientists would attempt to make him speak again. Fast forward to 2020, a team from the University of York, the University of London, and the Leeds Museum began a radical experiment. Their goal was to recreate the voice of Nesyamun using modern technology. They started by performing a high-resolution CT scan of the entire mummy. The scan captured every preserved detail, from the curve of his throat to the shape of his tongue and mouth cavity. Even after 3,000 years, the structure of his vocal tract could be reconstructed. Using this data, scientists 3D printed an exact replica of his vocal tract, essentially a synthetic throat based on his anatomy. They attached the replica to a mechanical larynx capable of vibrating air through the 3D model. Then they pressed a button. A sound emerged. Low, human, haunting. A single vowel, the faint breath of a voice that had been silent for 3 millennia. The researchers called it the voice of Nesyamun. It wasn't a word, it wasn't a chant. It was a single tone somewhere between ah and a. But that sound, that vibration, represented the return of a voice from the ancient world. When the sound was first played publicly, people were stunned. Some described it as eerie, others as beautiful. For the researchers, it was both an achievement and a moment of deep reflection. They knew that for the Egyptians, speech was sacred. The gods themselves were said to have created the world through the act of speaking. The ability to talk, to utter sound, was a sign that the soul was still alive. So, in a strange way, science had done exactly what Nesyamun had asked for. On his coffin, he had written that he wished to speak again. And now, he had. The 2020 experiment produced only a single sound, but it opened the door to something much larger. In the years that followed, scientists began to combine 3D modeling with artificial intelligence. By training AI speech models on reconstructed Egyptian phonetics, drawn from hieroglyphic texts and ancient Greek transcriptions, researchers could simulate how the Egyptian language might have sounded. Using deep learning voice synthesis, they began teaching the AI to speak Egyptian words through the reconstructed vocal tract of Nesyamun. Imagine that, an AI system analyzing linguistic data from 4,000-year-old inscriptions, generating probable vowel and consonant sounds, and then passing them through a replica of a 3,000-year-old priest's throat. For the first time in human history, we may soon hear complete words spoken in the voice of a man who lived under the pharaohs. The success of this experiment inspired a wave of similar research. At Harvard, AI teams are testing vocal reconstruction for ancient Greek and Roman orators using skulls and written descriptions of their voices. In Japan, scientists are experimenting with sound modeling for Neanderthal speech using vocal tract data from fossils. And in Italy, archaeologists have scanned the casts of Pompeii victims, attempting to recreate how their final shouts might have sounded. A haunting blend of history and technology. Each project raises new ethical questions, but also deep curiosity. Because when we hear the voices of the past, we realize that history isn't just a collection of dates and artifacts, it's the echo of real people. Of course, not everyone supports this kind of research. Some argue that giving voice to the dead crosses a line, that it disrespects sacred remains. Others see it as a form of scientific resurrection, a fulfilling what the ancients themselves desired: immortality through memory. The researchers behind the Nesyamun project faced similar debate. They insisted that their work was done with respect and in accordance with Egyptian cultural authorities. Nesyamun's own inscription clearly stated his wish to speak again. So in their eyes, they were simply granting that wish through modern means. Still, the first time they played his voice in the lab, they admitted feeling something indescribable. As one of them said, "It was as if history exhaled." Artificial intelligence is transforming how we understand the ancient world. We've already seen AI analyze hieroglyphs faster than human experts, reconstruct broken statues, and even simulate lost cities in virtual reality. But voice reconstruction takes it further. It brings emotion back to history. Imagine standing in a museum and hearing a priest recite a prayer exactly as it sounded 3,000 years ago. Or listening to the words of philosophers long dead, spoken not by actors, but by their own biological voices, recreated through AI. This is not science fiction. It's the next frontier of archaeology. As one researcher from Kyoto University said in 2025, "We used to study history with our eyes. Now, we can study it with our ears." For the ancient Egyptians, the voice was more than vibration. It was identity. When they mummified the body, they preserved the organs of speech, the tongue, the mouth, the throat, because they believed the soul would need them in the afterlife. When we hear Nesyamun's voice today, it's not just science at work. It's the continuation of a 3,000-year-old belief that the voice carries the essence of the soul. That's why this experiment resonates so deeply. It's not about technology alone. It's about memory, about time, about the fragile bridge between life and death, made of nothing but sound. Somewhere in that faint ah, that single tone produced in a sterile laboratory, lies a message that transcends time. It says, I was here, I lived, I had a voice, and perhaps that is the true purpose of this experiment. Not to resurrect the dead, but to remind the living that every life, no matter how distant, once spoke. 3,000 years ago, Nesyamun prayed that his voice would be heard again after death. He could never have imagined that his wish would be fulfilled not by gods or magic, but by machines. In a quiet lab in modern England, the sound of ancient Egypt returned. Brief, imperfect, but real. For a moment, time folded in on itself. The ancient and the modern became one. Whether you see it as science, spirituality, or destiny, one thing is certain. Artificial intelligence has given history a heartbeat. And through that heartbeat, the dead now speak again. What do you think? Should science use AI to resurrect ancient voices? Or are some mysteries better left in silence? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey through time and technology, make sure to like, subscribe, and share for more stories where history meets the future. Because the past isn't silent, it's just waiting for someone to listen.